Officer David Smith walked into courtroom 7 with a smug smile on his face. He had been a police officer for 15 years in the town of Oakwood. His uniform was neat, his badge shined brightly, and his confidence was sky-high. Today, he would face the new judge for the first time. The courtroom was busy that morning. People whispered as they waited for their cases to be called. Lawyers shuffled papers at their tables. Court officers stood at attention by the doors. When the bailiff called out, "All rise for the Honorable Judge William Brown," David barely stood up straight. He leaned against the wall and whispered to his partner, Officer James Wilson. "Great," he muttered. "This is the new appointment they've been talking about." Judge Brown walked in wearing his black robe. He moved with quiet dignity. His face was serious but kind as he nodded to the room and took his seat at the bench. David had never appeared before Judge Brown, but he had already made up his mind about him. At the police station, rumors spread quickly. Some officers didn't like that Judge Brown had a reputation for questioning police testimony carefully. "He doesn't trust cops," one officer had told David last week. "He'll make your job harder." David watched as Judge Brown handled the first few cases. The judge was thorough and patient. He listened carefully to everyone who spoke. But David wasn't impressed. He crossed his arms and rolled his eyes when the judge took time with a young man who had missed his community service hours. "Second chance," David whispered to James. "Waste of time." When it was time for David's case, he stepped forward confidently. He was testifying about evidence he had collected in a burglary case. As he explained his procedures, Judge Brown interrupted with a question. "Officer Smith, could you clarify how you documented the chain of custody for the items you found?" David was surprised by the question. He wasn't used to being questioned about routine procedures. He answered with a hint of annoyance in his voice. "I followed standard department protocol, Your Honor. Like I always do." Judge Brown leaned forward slightly. "Could you explain the specific steps you took, for the record?" David sighed loudly. He glanced at the other officers sitting in the gallery. A few of them smirked, encouraging his attitude. "I collected the items, put them in evidence bags, labeled them, and took them to the evidence room. Like we always do, Your Honor." His tone was dismissive, almost mocking. A few officers in the back of the room chuckled quietly. Judge Brown noticed the disrespect but stayed perfectly calm. He looked directly at David and spoke in a clear, measured voice. "Officer Smith, in my courtroom, we adhere to procedure with precision. The rights of every citizen depend on it. Please provide the exact details of the documentation process." David felt his face grow warm. He wasn't used to being challenged. With poorly hidden frustration, he gave more details about the evidence handling. When he finished testifying, Judge Brown simply said, "Thank you, Officer Smith. That will be all for now." As David walked back to his seat, he made a face that made his fellow officers smile. He didn't care if the judge saw him. In David's mind, this was just another day dealing with a judge who didn't understand real police work. What David didn't notice was how carefully Judge Brown was watching him. The judge made a few notes on his pad before moving on to the next case. Later that day, in the hallway outside the courtroom, David loudly mimicked Judge Brown's formal way of speaking. "Officer Smith, in my courtroom," he said in a mocking voice. His fellow officers laughed. "That guy needs to spend a day on patrol with us," David said. "Then he'd understand what we're dealing with." What David didn't know was that Judge Brown had worked as a prosecutor in some of the toughest neighborhoods for 20 years before becoming a judge. He had seen both sides of the justice system. And he had dealt with officers like David many times before. As David walked out of the courthouse that day, he had no idea that his attitude in court would soon lead to consequences that would change his life forever. Over the next few weeks, things grew worse between Officer David Smith and Judge William Brown. Each time David appeared in court, his attitude became more disrespectful. His fellow officers quietly encouraged him, laughing at his jokes about the judge in the hallways and break room. "Here comes Officer Smith," the court clerk would whisper to the bailiff when David entered courtroom 7. Everyone could feel the tension in the air. One Tuesday morning, David arrived to testify in a drug possession case. He walked in late, making more noise than necessary as he took his place in the witness box. When Judge Brown asked him to explain the arrest procedure, David spoke quickly and carelessly, as if the details weren't important. "Officer Smith, please slow down and explain how you determined the substance was illegal before making the arrest," Judge Brown requested calmly. David let out a heavy sigh that everyone in the courtroom could hear. "I've been doing this job for 15 years, Your Honor. I know what illegal substances look like." A few officers sitting in the back row smirked. David caught their eyes and felt bolstered by their support. Judge Brown remained patient. "The court needs to hear the specific steps you took to identify the substance, Officer Smith." "Field test, Your Honor," David replied shortly. "Standard procedure." "And the results of that test were documented where?" the judge pressed. David rolled his eyes openly this time. "In my report, of course." The defense attorney stood up. "Your Honor, I don't see any test results in the reports provided to me." Now David was getting frustrated. He shifted his weight and glared at the defense attorney. "Then you must have missed it." Judge Brown looked through the file in front of him. "I don't see the test documentation either, Officer Smith." David felt his face grow hot. He didn't like being questioned, especially not in front of a courtroom full of people. The paperwork must have been filed separately. These things happen. Judge Brown looked at David over his reading glasses. "These things should not happen, Officer Smith. Proper documentation is essential to our justice system." David couldn't contain himself. He laughed, a short, dismissive sound that echoed through the quiet courtroom. Then he leaned over to the court clerk and whispered something that made her eyes widen in shock. Across the room, several officers chuckled. Judge Brown set down his pen. "Officer Smith, approach the bench, please." The room fell completely silent as David walked forward. He moved slowly, almost dragging his feet like a defiant teenager. "Your behavior shows contempt for this court and the justice system we're both sworn to uphold," Judge Brown said quietly. "I'm giving you one opportunity to adjust your attitude." David looked back at his colleagues, then faced the judge again. "With all due respect, Your Honor," he replied with a barely hidden smirk, "perhaps you don't understand how things work on the streets." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Even David's supporters looked uncomfortable now. He had crossed a line. Judge Brown's expression remained calm, but his eyes had hardened. "We will continue this discussion in my chambers tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. sharp. Court is adjourned for today." As people filed out of the courtroom, David received mixed reactions from his fellow officers. Some patted him on the back, saying the judge needed to be put in his place. Others avoided eye contact, sensing that David had gone too far. That evening, David sat at home telling his wife, Mary, about what happened. "You said what to a judge?" Mary asked, looking worried. She worked as a teacher and understood the importance of respect for authority. "He needed to hear it," David insisted. "These judges sit up there in their fancy robes thinking they know everything about our job." Mary shook her head. "David, this doesn't sound good. What if he reports you to your superiors?" David waved away her concern. "Chief Parker always backs his officers. Nothing will come of this." But as he went to bed that night, a small worry began to grow in David's mind. He remembered how the court clerk had looked at him after the judge's order, with pity, as if she knew something he didn't. The next morning, David put on his best uniform and arrived at the courthouse at 7:55 a.m. As he approached Judge Brown's chambers, he was surprised to see not only the judge's assistant waiting, but also Police Chief Parker and District Attorney Thompson standing outside the door. Chief Parker's face was stern. "Smith," he said with a nod. "Judge Brown is waiting for us." David felt his stomach sink. This was going to be more serious than he had expected. David followed Chief Parker and District Attorney Thompson into Judge Brown's chambers. The room was warm and filled with books. Certificates and family photos hung on the walls. Judge Brown sat behind a large wooden desk, no longer wearing his black robe but a simple white shirt and tie. "Officer Smith, please take a seat," Judge Brown said, pointing to an empty chair. David sat down, trying to look confident. But inside, he felt nervous. The presence of his chief and the district attorney told him this wasn't just a simple warning. "Officer Smith," Judge Brown began, folding his hands on his desk. "I've been watching your behavior in my courtroom for several weeks now. Your disrespect isn't just directed at me. It's directed at the entire justice system." David started to speak, but Chief Parker gave him a look that said, "Be quiet and listen." Judge Brown continued. "I've issued an order that I believe will benefit both the court and the police department." He slid a document across the desk. David glanced down at it but didn't pick it up. "For the next 30 days, you will be assigned to assist with the Community Justice Program. You'll work directly with court staff, defense attorneys, and community members to understand the full scope of our justice system." David's mouth fell open. "You're taking me off patrol? You can't do that." Chief Parker leaned forward. "He's not doing anything, Smith." "I am. And yes, I can." David turned to his chief in disbelief. "Sir, you're going along with this?" Chief Parker nodded firmly. "This isn't punishment, David. It's an opportunity. Judge Brown approached me with this idea, and I approved it because I believe it will make you a better officer." David looked to District Attorney Thompson, hoping for some support. Instead, the DA added, "This isn't optional, Officer Smith. Your behavior has jeopardized cases. This is your chance to correct course." "What about my current cases?" David asked, his voice smaller now. "Officer Wilson will take over your caseload," Chief Parker explained. "Starting tomorrow, you report to Mrs. Eleanor Phillips at the Community Justice Center. She runs the program and will be your supervisor for the next month." David's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. He felt like he was being sent back to school as punishment. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "I'm a good cop. I make arrests. I get convictions." Judge Brown leaned forward. "Being a good police officer is about more than arrests and convictions, Officer Smith. It's about justice. It's about treating everyone with dignity, even those who have broken the law." David looked down at his hands. He wanted to argue more, but he knew it would only make things worse. "The program starts at 9 a.m. tomorrow," Judge Brown said. "Mrs. Phillips will explain everything. You're dismissed for today." David stood up stiffly and walked out without another word. In the hallway, he punched the wall in frustration, immediately regretting it as pain shot through his hand. Chief Parker followed him out. "Smith, wait." David turned around, still angry. "What?" "I've been watching you change over these last few years," Chief Parker said. "You used to be one of my most caring officers. Remember the Johnson family? How you checked on them every week after Mr. Johnson died? What happened to that officer?" David didn't answer. He remembered the Johnson family, a widow with 3 young children. He had indeed visited them regularly, brought them groceries sometimes, made sure they were safe. "This job can harden you," Chief Parker continued. "It's happened to the best of us. But we can't let it change who we are. Use this month, David. Really use it." David nodded slightly but didn't speak. He walked out of the courthouse feeling like everyone was watching him. That evening, David sat on his back porch, staring at the Community Justice Program handbook. His wife Mary brought him a cup of coffee and sat beside him. "Maybe this won't be so bad," she said gently. "Maybe you needed a break from patrol anyway." "It's humiliating," David replied. "What am I supposed to tell everyone?" "Tell him you're learning new skills," Mary suggested. "Which is true." David flipped through the handbook. The program seemed to involve working with many different parts of the justice system: courts, probation, community outreach, victim services, and more. As he read, a small part of him wondered if Chief Parker was right. Had he changed over the years? Had he become so focused on making arrests that he'd forgotten why he became a police officer in the first place? The next morning, David drove to the Community Justice Center. It was a small building downtown, nothing fancy. A sign on the door read, "Working together for a better community." David took a deep breath and walked inside, not knowing that the people he would meet there would change his life forever. David walked into the Community Justice Center feeling like a schoolboy sent to detention. The main room was bright and busy. People talked in small groups. Posters about second chances and community support covered the walls. A tall woman with gray hair approached him. "You must be Officer Smith," she said with a warm smile. "I'm Eleanor Phillips. Welcome to our program." David nodded stiffly. "Where do I start?" "First, coffee," Eleanor said, leading him to a small kitchen area. "Then I'll show you what we do here." Over coffee, Eleanor explained the program. "We work with people from all sides of the justice system. Some have been in prison. Some are victims of crime. Some are family members affected by incarceration. Our goal is to heal communities, not just punish wrongdoing." David listened but said little. This all sounded like soft, useless talk to him. "Today, you'll sit in on our morning meeting. Just listen and observe," Eleanor instructed. The meeting was unlike anything David had experienced. People shared their stories openly. A man named Tom talked about his struggle to find work after prison. A woman named Beth described how her neighborhood felt unsafe after a series of break-ins. A teenage boy named Mark explained how a mentor had helped him stay away from gangs. David sat silently, uncomfortable with these personal stories. This wasn't how he viewed the justice system. For him, there were good guys and bad guys, law-abiding citizens and criminals. These gray areas made him uneasy. After the meeting, Eleanor assigned David to help Tom prepare for job interviews. David reluctantly sat with Tom, reviewing his resume. "I made mistakes," Tom said honestly. "Spent 5 years in prison for robbery. But I've changed. I just need someone to give me a chance." David looked at Tom closely. In the past, he would have seen only an ex-con. Now, he was forced to see a man trying to rebuild his life. "Your work experience section is weak," David said. "But you have skills from the prison workshop program. Let's focus on those." The next day, David accompanied a court advocate named Rachel to help domestic violence survivors navigate the court system. He watched as Rachel gently guided a frightened woman through filing for a protective order. "The system can be overwhelming," Rachel explained to David afterward. "Many people give up because they don't understand the process or feel intimidated." David thought about how many times he had been frustrated when victims didn't show up to court. He had always assumed they didn't care. Now he wondered if they had just been scared and confused. As the days passed, David's assignments varied. He helped at a youth program for at-risk teens. He sat in on public defender meetings, seeing how they struggled with huge caseloads. He went to community mediation sessions where neighbors resolved conflicts without going to court. One afternoon in the second week, David was surprised to see Judge Brown walk into the center. The judge wasn't wearing his robe, just regular clothes. "Officer Smith," Judge Brown said with a nod. "How are you finding the program?" David hesitated. "It's different from what I expected." Judge Brown smiled. "Would you walk with me? I usually take a lap around the park on my lunch break." As they walked, Judge Brown asked David about his experiences at the center. To his own surprise, David found himself sharing his thoughts openly. "I never considered how confusing the system must seem to people without legal training," David admitted. "Or how hard it is to get back on your feet after serving time." Judge Brown nodded. "I spent 20 years as a prosecutor before becoming a judge. I thought I understood justice. But I was missing a big piece of the picture." "What changed your view?" David asked. "I grew up in Pine Heights," Judge Brown replied. David stopped walking. Pine Heights was one of the toughest neighborhoods in the city, the same area where David now patrolled. "You grew up in Pine Heights?" Judge Brown nodded. "My father worked 2 jobs. My mother cleaned houses. I had officers in my neighborhood who treated everyone like criminals. And I had one officer who helped me join a youth program that probably kept me out of trouble. David was silent, processing this information. I didn't become a judge to get even with bad officers, Judge Brown continued. I became a judge to get it right. To make the system work for everyone. For the first time, David saw Judge Brown not as an enemy but as someone with a different perspective on the same goal, justice. That evening, David sat in his car for a long time before driving home. He thought about Tom struggling to find work, the scared woman filing for protection, and the teenagers trying to stay out of trouble. He thought about Judge Brown growing up in Pine Heights. Slowly, David began to see beyond his assumptions. He recognized patterns in how quickly he judged people and situations, and how those judgments affected his work as an officer. Maybe I've been seeing only part of the picture, he whispered to himself. The final week of David's assignment at the Community Justice Center brought his biggest challenge yet. Eleanor asked him to help organize a community dialogue between police officers and residents from Pine Heights. We need someone who understands both sides, she explained. You're perfect for this. David wasn't sure he was perfect for anything anymore. His time at the center had shaken his confidence in many ways. But he agreed to help. He called 5 officers he trusted and invited them to participate. Then he worked with community leaders to invite residents. The meeting was set for Thursday evening in the local community center. When Thursday came, David arrived early to set up chairs. He felt nervous. These worlds rarely mixed peacefully. As people began arriving, he noticed the clear division: officers on one side of the room, residents on the other. Eleanor opened the meeting. We're here to listen and learn from each other. Nothing more, nothing less. A young man named Marcus spoke first. I get stopped by police at least twice a month, just walking home from work. Same questions every time. Same suspicion. Do you know what that feels like? One of the officers, Ben, responded defensively. We stop people based on suspicious behavior, not race. The conversation grew heated quickly. David watched, seeing himself in Ben's defensive posture and tone. Then an elderly woman named Mrs. Taylor raised her hand. My husband was robbed last year. Officer Williams treated us with such kindness. He checked on us for weeks after. Not all experiences are bad. Slowly, more stories emerged from both sides. Officers shared their fears and frustrations. Residents described both positive and negative interactions with police. David finally stood up. A month ago, I wouldn't have believed this meeting could be useful, he admitted. I saw my job as simply enforcing the law. Black and white. But I'm learning there's a lot of gray. The room went quiet. I grew up wanting to help people. Somewhere along the way, I started seeing some people as problems instead of people who needed help. I'm trying to find my way back. After the meeting, Marcus approached David. You're the officer who arrested my cousin last year. David tensed, remembering the arrest, a drug charge. He had been rough with the young man. He said you treated him like garbage, Marcus continued. But he also said you made sure his mother knew where he was being taken. That meant something to our family. David nodded, not sure what to say. Maybe next time, you could do the second part without the first part, Marcus suggested with a small smile before walking away. The next day marked the end of David's 30 days. He was scheduled to meet with Judge Brown, Chief Parker, and District Attorney Thompson again. As he drove to the courthouse, David wondered what would happen next. Would he simply return to patrol? Did he even want to? Judge Brown's chambers felt different this time. David entered with respect rather than defiance. Officer Smith, Judge Brown began, your 30 days are complete. Before we discuss next steps, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the experience. David took a deep breath. Your Honor, I owe you an apology, he began sincerely. I brought prejudices into your courtroom that had no place in a hall of justice. Judge Brown nodded. Apology accepted. What have you learned? That justice isn't just about enforcing laws, it's about seeing people as people first. I've been policing without truly seeing the communities I serve. David paused. I want to continue with the program, if possible. There's more work I can do. Chief Parker looked surprised. You want to stay with the program? Not full-time, David clarified. But I'd like to help build better connections between our department and the community. The meeting last night showed me how much work we have to do. Judge Brown smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. Chief Parker and I have discussed creating a new position, Community Relations Officer. The job would be half patrol, half community engagement. David felt a surge of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. I'd be honored to take on that role, sir. As they shook hands, David said, "Thank you for not giving up on me when you had every reason to." That's not how justice works, Judge Brown replied. At its best, our system should be about growth and healing, not just punishment. You're proof of that. 1 year later, David stood in the community center in Pine Heights. The room was full of officers and residents, all talking together as they planned a neighborhood safety program. There were still tensions sometimes, still misunderstandings. But they were talking and listening. David caught Judge Brown's eye across the room. The judge gave him a small nod of approval. Outside, David's patrol car was parked next to a basketball court where Officer Wilson was playing a game with local teenagers. Change was happening, slowly but surely. And it had started with one judge who had the courage to order a difficult officer to see the world through different eyes.